Hello and welcome to Camera Review. Today we are looking at Profoto's A1, A1X. Now, the reason I wanted to discuss this, and it's been a long time since they released the A1 and then A1X, is because I want to give you a general perspective of what this light is, what the Speedlight is, although it's been called smallest strobe or smallest studio light by the company. I think that it is more of a speed light, and I'll explain the reasons why, but also I want to explain how they may apply to your photography and possibly the other alternatives that are out there in the market is compared to this one. Let's begin on what this is. This is a speed light. The reason I say this is a speed light is if you look at what top line Canon or Nikon or other manufacturers like Nissan produces for their speed lights, and you look at their guide numbers, which is usually between 190 to 10 or a little higher than that, it equates to about 75 to 76 watts per second. So if you compare that to this speed light, it's about the same. So technically calling it a studio strobe or studio light is part of a marketing scheme or marketing plan to market it at a little bit higher price than what it would sell for. Of course, hence the price tag of about $1,000 or $1,100. You see the scheme of having to purchase a speed light and paying a premium price for it. Of course, this not to take away from the fact that Profoto has been around for a long time, has been a leader in producing light shaping tools, as well as lights, of course. But what is important is to realize and put it into a foundation what each light and each product defines itself as. So it is a speed light. Now, there are advantages to speed lights, and this is one particular innovation that sets it apart from other typical speed lights. And the main reason for that is the round shaped front element, where you'll see that in normal speed lights it is square or rectangular, or it is somewhat shaped in a way that it looks like a kind of a large matchbox on top of a unit that stores the batteries. This one is a little different. It looks like a round flashlight type of look that has a very nice output. So the question is, should you be purchasing this speed light, and what advantages it may give you? Now, firstly, it will give you a little bit of advantage because it is designed to give you more of a circular light rather than a rectangular light. So in a perspective where you are not actually shaping the light, it might affect the way that the image looks. But you will also find that the way it comes out is not exactly a beautiful gradation of tonalities from a circular light source, but rather an abrupt look that gives a sense that it was coming out of a speed light. So in that respect, I think it's not truly an advantage. Then we're going to have to look at what's functionality. Well, the functionality, I look at it, the ergonomics, and that is how big is this and how much performance difference does it make. If we put it side by side to another lights, like a speed light that is from Canon, the 600 EXR2, that one is pretty much smaller than this one. So you might be asking, why am I getting a larger light that's going to be more bulky to carry? Well, you got to understand that this is a different design, and different design sometimes means larger bodies. And this is exactly what we're having here. Also, the fact that it holds more charges, so to say, when you're doing photography and you have to flash a number of times during, for example, event or a wedding. So could that be possibly an advantage? Now, that is something that I have looked into and investigated and used a number of times. And I tell you what I have found personally. If you are using this as on top of your camera and the unit is not waiting to get a signal like an off camera flash situation where trigger signals the flash to fire, then you're going to get pretty decent numbers. The A1 has approximately 350 shots as they claim, and the new one, A1X, is supposedly 450. Now, I found these numbers to be not as consistent, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But also, there has been a little improvement in terms of the flash recycling time. Flash recycling time is very, very important, because what happens is that if you are doing, for example, wedding photography, you cannot wait for the flash to recycle for 5 seconds or 6 seconds or even 3 seconds, because it uses the momentum of photography and makes the client feels uncomfortable. And it's similarly the case when you're doing events photography. You can't say, oh, you know what, let's wait for the flash to recycle. That means you need to have a short flash duration. Now, the A1 had 1.2 seconds, and the new one supposedly has 1. The question is, how many shots are you going to do in a row? For example, if you're doing shots in a rapid fashion and you're firing off 3, 4, 5, that's fine. But if you end up firing 30 shots because it is the moment when the rings are being exchanged, or that first kiss is there, or something where the vows are being said, you may fire more shots than that. And what does that end up being? It ends up being a number of shots that will make the unit get hot. And like all units, the flash units, whether this Profoto or other ones, there is a heat protection mechanism. So when does that kick in? Well, that kicks in about after 30 or 40 shots, and the unit will not function as intended, or will not give you as intended output. So in that respect, it is limited. It will not do all those things that people assume that it will do. So you're not going to get 300 or 400 flashes right after each other. There's going to be a lapse when you have to allow the unit to cool down. Now, generally, that's not a problem, because most of the times we're shooting like maybe 5, 6, 7 images with flash and letting that time elapse before we do another shot somewhere else. But in overall, it affects the quality of images if there is a variation in the number of frames that you're taking and the Kelvin scales shift. Now, generally, I find that Profoto has a pretty stable shift in colors, and that is about between 100 to 200 Kelvin. So you're getting a pure white, and which is about 5600-5700 range, and then it does fluctuate as you lower the power, or you have shot number of power shots. So what is happening is that it's going to fluctuate. That is not a truly big concern if the number is relatively small, like 200. But when it gets to be a larger number, that does become an issue. For Profotos, I haven't seen that to be the case. But usability is a truly important factor. Let's say you're in the circumstances where you have these off-camera flashes, because as anybody who has experienced using on-camera flash, you'll find that the light is very harsh. It makes the shadows look harsh and makes the images have a flatter profile. And that is one of the reasons that people put the camera away from the flash and have it directional. If, for example, you want to create a Rembrandt look, you may want to put it on the side. That means you have to trigger the flash with a remote. And that's when the remotes come in, because you have the Profoto's remote, which is selling for about $412, another expensive item. So what happens if you are exclusively using it off camera? My experience, the flash drains incredibly fast. The battery does not even last 200 shots. Why? Because on standby, it eats up the battery. So instead of getting 350, 400 shots on an A1X, you're getting about 200. In fact, you might even see shooting like 50 shots, and then you'll see the bar drop to 50. And 50% of the power in 50 shots is quite incredible. And if you wait a little longer and you take one shot, you might see a dramatic drop to maybe 20%, depending on how you're using it or how long you have stayed on standby. So that is a crucial factor. If that is eating up the battery, it is not a useful unit to use. It's not a useful item to use if you are, for example, on a shoot that's going to last 3, 4, 5 hours, like a wedding reception or an event. So it is for that reason choosing a Profoto A1 or A1X for your next film or photography adventure might be a question that you might have to consider. Another important consideration is if you are, for example, going to use this and you want to adjust the power. What happens with the remote is you don't see exactly how much you have adjusted. You can only assume that you are going up or one stop by the dial that it has. Profoto, again, deviated from the traditional way of measuring flash, which is like 1/16 or 1/32 or 1/64 of its power, rather than to use the scale of 1 to 10 with incremental changes. So that is an important factor for someone who doesn't use these kind of older systems where it has been the standard and wants to incorporate a system where it is almost idiot proof. Then this works very well. Plus the fact that it looks very, very nice and beautiful and just has a superb look. And for if you are going into a business and you show off your equipment as part of your imaging and your marketing, then it works very well to have Profoto. But if your intent is to produce incredible images, well, there are other alternatives which I'm going to get into in my other following videos. But I want to talk about the Profoto A1 and A1X. In a way, I think that Profoto has made a big change in the way that we see speedlights. And that is because it has gone from the conventional system to a round head. And it allows the attachments to be placed on it very easily. Before, we had to buy instruments like magmods and rogues, and we had to put these units and had to adapt them to our flashes so that we could get grids or softer lights or bounce cars and all these other ways of shaping the light so we can get a better image. But Profoto has changed that. And for that, I congratulate Profoto, because Profoto has done something good by putting something that we use all the time onto a system that is exclusively designed to work integratedly. Of course, you might say, what about competition? Well, competition almost identically copied this, and I don't blame them because they have done a very good job. The question is it better or is it worse? And that's something that is for other reviews. But getting back to the A1 and A1X, there is one thing that is important to point out is why was A1 produced and then A1X was sold? Why did it be necessary to upgrade a system that is supposed to be a very good system? And how come the A1X was not put in the first place? Well, it has a lot to do with the way that the marketing works. If we were having a system like Pro A1 and Profoto released it, they would have everybody buying it. But then when the A1X came out, all those people who bought it said, oh no, something better came out. Then they have to try to sell it to replace it with a better one. And that is where things start changing. Because if you look online, like the ones that the links are provided down at the bottom, you can go on certain platforms like eBay and other places. You will find that they are sold at half the price or a little bit higher than half price. So they are lost value. Now, what will happen with A1X remains to be seen because it's a new product. Yet, I will tell you this. What if you could do the same photography or have more power, more faster recycling time, and paid a little less? That's where it will shine, and that is what we'll be talking in our next review. But right now, I leave you with this thought. If you were to purchase Profoto A1 or you own the Profoto A1, is it worthwhile to upgrade it to A1X? And I hope that this video has answered some of those questions. I look forward to seeing you in our next review, and I thank you for watching.